welcome to the Film Angle. I'm Alex, and today we have a really special interview to showcase to you with a documentary filmmaker, Tristan Loraine, who has two feature documentary films that just premiered at the Raindance Film Festival in London. Tristan's really interesting because he is a former aircraft pilot who, after retiring for health reasons, retrained with the National Film and Television School and Raindance and set up an award-winning production banner, Fact Not Fiction Films, in 2006. He is a subject matter expert on the issue of air quality on aircraft and was awarded a British Citizen Award for his work in this field. With his company, he has directed and produced over 30 productions that have filmed in 5 different continents. The two films we're talking about today, though, are This Is Your Captain Speaking, which is a compelling investigative documentary that delves into the controversial issue of cabin air quality, and it reveals how toxic fumes from aircraft engines can contaminate the air passengers and crew breathe whilst on board. And then his second documentary, Our Journey with Lobular Breast Cancer, that follows Dr. Susan Michaelis and other women with invasive lobular cancer as they share their deeply personal experiences and campaign for critical research funding for a disease that often evades standard mammograms and ultrasounds and has no specific treatment at this time. It's a really important documentary that I believe should be making its way for public viewing very soon, and I kind of urge everybody to watch it when it is. We will notify you when they have. You may have seen the films at Raindance already, so lucky you if you have. But if you want to find out a little bit more about the behind the scenes of kind of documentary filmmaking and the kind of process to go from an idea to assembling, shooting, editing a documentary feature, then hopefully you'll find some insights here in this interview with Tristan. So I'll just get into it. Let's get into the interview with Tristan Loraine. Welcome to the show, Tristan Loraine.
Thanks for having me.
No worries at all. It's great to have you here, especially with two of your documentaries premiering at the Raindance Film Festival this week, and next week, I believe, as well, right?
Yeah, premiering on the 23rd and 24th of June. So we're really lucky, really honoured.
But before we dive into both of those films, I'd love to just rewind a little bit with you. You were an airline pilot before becoming a filmmaker. But I'm curious, before you even became an airline pilot, did film play a significant role in your life at all?
Yeah, the first paid job I ever had was a film extra. I was living in France, and my father knew a director, and he said, "Oh, what about my children coming along and being extras?" So she says, "Yeah, sure." So I turned up on set, and I must have been about 15. And the guy, the third AD, came along and said, "Who the hell is this kid? What's he doing here?" And the second AD was a bit kind of nervous and said, they're friends of the director. I went, "Oh, yes, of course. Yeah, no problem at all. Just put an artificial mustache on him and put him around the back somewhere." So that was my first experience of filmmaking. But I've always loved film. It's just, as a young boy, my father would send my brothers and I off to see as many films as we wanted on a Saturday, probably to get rid of us. But it's great, just sitting in cinemas watching films. You learn so much from other people's visions.
Definitely. So I'm interested then, was there ever an aspiration to become a filmmaker, or was that because your documentaries hit on quite heavy subjects? And I wondered whether the documentary filmmaking method was almost a means to an end with kind of showcasing these messages, or whether it was something that, like, deep down you were like, one day I want to make a film.
I've always been I never kind of thought about it like that until when my father said, if you want to work in the film business, he would help me try and get me in, maybe to be a cameraman or something like that. And I always, since a young boy, wanted to be a pilot. So I went off to train to be a commercial airline pilot in California. And before I went, I bought the last of the Super 8 cameras. So the very last model of Super 8 film cameras before the digital world arrived. And so I get out to California, and I thought, oh, you know what? I'm going to make, just from my dad, I'm going to make a little film out here about me learning to fly. So you used to get the films processed, splice them together like in the good old way, and I made my film. And yeah, so that was my first film. But I always wanted to be a pilot, and
Mm.
then in 2006, I was ill health retired from being an airline captain with British Airways, and was a bit unhappy at what had happened to me. So I thought, I need to tell people. People said, well, why don't you just sue the airline? I thought, well, it's not, that would only benefit me. What we really need to do is tell the world about this issue to benefit everybody. So I went off and did a course at Raindance, and Elliot Grove, who's the founder of Raindance, he was there, and he was amazing, a real inspiration. And then after I did loads of courses there, I went off to National Film Television School in Beaconsfield and did some more specialist courses. And with all that knowledge, I then set up a film company and made my first documentary called Welcome Aboard Toxic Airlines. And when I look back on it now, it's I think, oh wow, it's terrible. But it was the first film I made. It premiered at a film. It premiered at a film festival in Paris, where I had grown up as a kid, and it was a really interesting experience because two of my nieces came along and they dressed up as flight attendants. And when everybody arrived, they said, "Welcome aboard. Hope I have a nice flight." So it kind of put the audience in the mood. The film festival had subtitled the film into French, and the film screened. And at the end, there's a Q&A session. So, you go up and they say, "Oh, ladies and gentlemen, tonight we have the director here," and you go up and you start answering questions. And then the director of the film festival came along and said, "Oh, okay, that's great, thank you everybody, anyway we need to move on to the next film." And the audience was so outraged with what they'd just seen in the film. I remember wanting them grabbing the
Mm.
festival director, pinning him against a wall, and said, "You shut up, we're listening to this guy." And Canal Plus heard about this kind of goings on at the cinema, so they then bought the film. And but just that night really showed me the power of what filmmaking can do, and how it can really trigger emotions. And as an audience member, if you think of films that people go to see, I can probably the film that most caused me the greatest emotional impact is when I grew up in Northern Ireland and during the Troubles. So, I lived through all the bombings and all that type of stuff. So I kind of had an interest in all that. And I went to see the film In the Name of the Father with Emma Thompson, all about the Guildford Four. And wow, it was so powerful. I thought, God, I wish I could make a film like that one day. And still trying, I guess.
Well, I am interested in the process of of how you go about making a documentary. My own kind of background within studying film and making short films and writing screenplays has very much been from a kind of, like I said, a screenplay process. But with a documentary, I imagine there's like a general structure in mind when you have that idea. But at what point do you go, all right, I'm just going to get out there and start shooting things? Or are you kind of very systematic with it? Are you like, okay, I want to get this piece, then this piece, then this piece? How does it take shape?
Well, it's a really interesting question because I find making a documentary infinitely harder than doing a feature film. I've done a few feature films and a
Mm.
feature reenactment documentary, but it's just so much more straightforward. You write a screenplay, you revise it, you tweak it, you go and cast it, you go out and film it, you turn up, that's the scene. You cover it the best you can in the time available, and the lower the budget, probably the you'll get least amount of coverage. If you're making a Bond film, you'll cover an action scene, maybe with 40 cameras. So it's all a question of doing the best with the budget you have. And then when you go to editing a feature film is just so straightforward when you have a good script supervisor, because you just pull out the notes. Scene 5, it's covered by these shots. There's only so many ways you can edit that, and then you move on to the next scene. And so that's so much straightforward. Whereas in a documentary, especially a lot of the ones we're doing, they're about evolving public interest subjects. So the one about air quality on airplanes that's going to premiere Raindance. This is your captain speaking. That that I started researching this issue in 2001. So I've been researching this for over 20 years. So you start to make the film, so you think, okay, these are the things we want to tell. But sometimes you can interview an expert who is an expert in their field, but on camera they just don't come across as well as you would like them to. So you then think,
Mm.
maybe not. Or you may be very limited in access to some people. I remember once going to the House of Lords to interview Betty Boothroyd, who was a very famous figure in the House of Lords, and I was making a documentary about ladies who flew Spitfires during the war. And so I turn up with my cinematographer and sound man and all our lighting kit and a production assistant, thinking we've got an hour to do this interview. And I walk in and she says, "Hi, change in plan. You've got 8 minutes starting from now." You just think, okay, this is documentary
Yeah.
filmmaking. Don't even think about trying to argue, debate, discuss, because you're losing time. So the first thing you've got to do is lighting. You
Yeah.
just got to just film what you got to get the content. You can't say, okay, let me just light this all neatly. No, you just got to get the content the best you can and then try and cover it with as much B-roll as possible. So in documentary filmmaking, you can be quite challenged. And I find if you come from a documentary filmmaking background like I do and you go into feature films, I think you can improvise and adapt quite quickly to changing circumstances. So, like if you are making a feature film and let's say you are meant to have, say, an hour to film this scene and it's the end of the day, but you're now left with only half an hour and you're never going to get a chance to reshoot it because you're an indie filmmaker and you're in this location you're never going to get again. You're just gonna then you go into documentary film mode. What is the most important shot or shots to do to
Yeah.
cover the scene to be able to edit it. And another thing I think is if as a filmmaker, if you also edit, then you're always filming thinking about how you're going to edit this. And I think it's a really good skill to, even if you're not a full-time editor, but if you know how to edit and you've edited stuff as a filmmaker, I think it really helps you in the filming, because you think, okay, how am I going to cut from this to this? So I need to get a little bit of a cutaway here or B-roll. So there's lots of applied skills. So a lot of people who I've worked with, fact not fiction films, they say working for me it's like being in the special forces. It's always improvise, adapt, overcome. And so I'm really blessed to have a really good crew who like my cinematographer who did both the documentaries that are at Raindance. You literally arrive on set and you don't need to even say to my cinematographer, okay, I want it framed this way or that way. He knows how you want it. You can get straight on to focusing on what the content is. Often I don't even look at what he's filming because I totally trust the guy is going to deliver.
That's great. That's great. I always wonder as well, and I guess probably more so with your documentaries, which are evolving stories. At what point do you, I guess, know when to end the documentary? I imagine with these cases, you are still filming things now, which might become films in the future. But how did you know with these stories, this is the end point, and this is what we want to showcase so far from this story?
Well, this is a really interesting question because here we are with Raindance. We got a film premiering on Monday, so we're the 17th of June now, and it's premiering on the 23rd. And there's stuff that has happened yesterday that we were thinking, should we do it? And so it would have involved doing a little bit of filming, some visual effects, so all the team could do it. But ultimately, we decided not to because when you make a film, it has to clear legal, and the film already has errors and omissions insurance. You can't now change the film. And if you do, you've got to give it back to
Mm,
the lawyers. The lawyers have got to give a report to the errors and omissions team, and they may change the terms or not. So we thought we can't risk it. So we just thought, as somebody once said to me, when you make a film about a public interest issue, it's not just the film speaking. You also have an outreach campaign, you have a website. So there's other ways of also getting the information out there. So if people take an interest in the film, they may go to the website, and then we can add more information there to say, if you're interested in this subject, these are other things that you might like to know, for instance.
Well, let's get in to the first film, shall we? So this is your captain speaking. Do you want to talk a little bit about what the documentary is about and its message for our audience?
So when a person boards an airplane, so if your viewers or listeners now will have mostly have all been on an airplane. So I have a question for you. When you board an airplane, where does the air you breathe come from? Think about that for a second. So last time you were in your flight and you were watching the movie, eating your meal halfway across the Atlantic or on the way to Australia or whatever, how were you kept alive when you're up at, say, 35,000 feet and the air pressure outside is so low you couldn't survive for, a minute, and the temperature is twice as cold as your home freezer. It's like minus 55 Celsius. So how they keep you alive is by providing air taken directly off the compression section of the engine. And this air is known as bleed air because it's bled off the engine. And this breathing air supply is provided to you unfiltered, and it gets contaminated with engine oil lubricants. And these engine oils are basically there for lubricating and moving heat away from bearings, etc., etc. So you get exposed to these chemicals, and these chemicals come in cans, oil cans or hydraulic fluid cans, and the warnings on these cans include do not breathe heated product, suspected of damaging fertility, risk to the unborn child, suspected causing cancer, etc., etc. So you think, hang on a minute. So the traveling public it's known they're getting exposed to these chemicals. They're never told about this. And the quality of the air on an airplane isn't monitored. When you think about it, as an airline captain, I can sit in the cockpit of an airplane and I can tell you the temperature of the air outside. I can tell you the temperature of the fuel, the temperature of the oil, the temperature in the cabin, but I can't tell you anything about the quality of the air people are breathing. I've got triple everything, triple, hydraulic systems, maybe 4 hydraulic systems, triple navigation system. The airplane can land totally by itself, but I've no idea whether the air you're breathing is safe or not. And so that, in essence, is what the film's about, and about how long has the industry known about this design flaw. This is a design flaw that fails dangerous. And it's a design flaw that ended my career less than a year after I did the Ironman triathlon. So I was a pretty fit guy, and this just totally, took my dream job away. So that's not acceptable. And the industry needs to resolve this problem because the world economy needs aviation. People want to fly. So we've made this film to say to the aerospace industry, come on, we have a design flaw. We need to fix it. The traveling public needs to be protected. And because we've been working with the industry for 20 years, telling them it's about this problem, and they're not resolving the problem, we thought, okay, now it's the last step. It's to make a documentary film and let the world know what's really going on so that pressure can be brought to introduce the technologies that could resolve this issue and protect the traveling public and also the flight crew, because you do not want to have flight safety compromised by crews being impaired or incapacitated.
It's a really fascinating documentary and really kind of shone a light on an area that I wasn't even aware of. And I love the way you start the documentary with asking that question, like, how much do you know about the air you breathe when you're flying? And I was kind of as shocked as I imagine most of the general public will be, that it's just not something you consider sometimes. And then you find out that these very small tubes that are, very intrinsically linked to the engine. I was wondering, when you are kind of presenting this, I guess, evidence and subject matter, how do you kind of balance the audience, or like the idea that the audience could be potentially quite a broad one? So you are coming at it with, letting us know the intrinsic details of what's happening, but that must be quite a balancing act to do in the editing process.
It is, because you've got to allow for a diverse range of ethnic backgrounds, intelligence levels, knowledge of aviation, of travel, etc. And also, we're not trying to scaremonger. We're not trying to sensationalize it.
Mm,
We're just giving you the facts. Somebody said to me, "Your film is like going into a courthouse where basically you're presenting all the evidence, and then the audience can then say, okay, is the aerospace industry guilty or innocent?" And that's the question people should ask: is
mm,
are passengers who watch this film disappointed that they are giving money to fly on airplanes when more should be done about it? And the other question is, the average passenger boards an airplane, they pay for a seat, they pay for a meal, they pay for a drink, they pay to check in a bag, but nobody says to them, "Oh, would you pay an extra pound for us to fit filters and sensors to protect you?" And they're never told that. There's no you get the pre-flight safety briefing that says, this is how you put your seatbelt on. If the airplane depressurizes, put your mask on. But nobody says, "Oh, and by the way, there's a possibility you might be exposed to these hazardous chemicals today, and here's the warning lady for the chemicals." Nobody says, "Oh, are you like a recently pregnant lady? Because these chemicals may or may not be harming the unborn child." Nobody says,
mm.
do you have any respiratory problems that might make you more vulnerable if there's an exposure? How an airline can allow this to happen? Where's their risk assessments? Why? How can an airline do this? And I just think we need to fix this. We really need to fix this. And if this film can play a part in that, then that's great. It would have achieved what it was set out to do.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. What do you think it is, or like why do you think it is that you've had like quite a bit of a pushback from the aviation industry on this matter? Like, where do you think that pushback is coming from?
I think the pushback comes from its economics. This is going to cost the industry money to fix. But and some airlines self-insure themselves, so if they have an accident, they just pick up the tab. But ultimately, I think it's a lack of leadership as well, because ultimately there are in 2008, when my first film came out, Labour Party were in power. And when the film came out, many MPs watched it, and even though it wasn't, the work of the century, it was enough for people to get the point, and it triggered a call for public inquiry from the Conservatives, the Liberal Democrats, and the Green parties. That's how outraged the politicians were. When they got into
Mm,
power, Conservatives and Lib Dems, they didn't do anything. So you think, well, hang on, you called for Republican power, you get into power, you don't do anything. Why is that? Because the aerospace industry is extremely powerful, it's extremely influential, and about one third of UK exports is aviation related. So nobody wants a bad news story.
mm,
But now, 2025, there's new, less hazardous oils. There's sensors, filtration technology that could be put onto airplanes. And I think also it's worth remembering that for audiences will be aware that if there's an accident or an incident on an airplane in the United Kingdom, the British Air Accident Investigation Branch is tasked to go and investigate, how did this plane crash or why did it nearly crash? And they will make recommendations to try and prevent accidents happening again. That's the whole reason they're there. Understand what went wrong and how do we prevent this in the future. And aviation is fantastic at learning. But on this issue,
yeah.
they just don't want to do anything. And the British Air Accident team have twice recommended that all airplanes should have warning systems fitted. So these are the people tasked to protect our safety, and the aircraft manufacturers just ignore them. And I believe they're ignoring them because they're terrified of the lawsuits. Once you start putting sensors on airplanes, people will say, hang on, I was exposed. I want the data to what I was exposed to. I was on an
Mm.
airplane that was 4 weeks pregnant and I miscarried. Boom, I want to sue you. And you can see they're terrified of that. That's why they don't put sensors on the airplanes. And that's my, that's what I believe.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Because I was particularly fascinated by the part in the documentary where you're at an Airbus press conference and you get to ask the question that specifically relates to this subject, and you're kind of pushed aside as your claims being absurd. And I wondered in that moment whether Airbus were being ignorant to the evidence that was being shown to them, or if they were kind of being malicious. But it sounds that it potentially is a malicious part on behalf of that industry.
I think the particular comment you're referring to in the film, I wonder now, today, now, if they wish they hadn't said that, but they did
Mm,
because they said, I say to them, why don't you make all your airplanes different so the air can't get contaminated? And they said, there's no problem. That's absurd, but it's crazy because the aerospace industry has known about this problem for decades, and the new Boeing 787 Dreamliner has been designed to totally resolve this problem. So the industry
mm.
can fix this if it wants to. And credit to Boeing for doing that. But it is the only airplane in the world that doesn't have this problem.
Do you think it's safe to fly for the general public? Audiences watching this at Raindance, if they're worried about potentially flying on a plane after this, what would you say to them?
I fly on airplanes. I take a mask. If I smell the air's contaminated, I put the mask on, so I know what to look for.
Mm,
And I think audiences, it's a good point to say to audiences, what are we talking about? How do you know the air is contaminated? Well, the first thing is, if you see something in the air, then you're in a really serious exposure. In all the years I
mm.
flew, I never saw any visible element. But in the film, we show some catastrophic cases where the whole airplane fills with oil fumes and you can't see a few rows in front of you. But the telltale sign is the smell. These when the oils are heated, they, without going into all the science, they give a kind of a dirty sock, wet dog type of smell, and it can be really subtle. And when we were making the film, we were filming on an airplane, as you mentioned, and we were measuring the air quality. And my cameraman, I noticed the smell on one of the 4 flights. The other 3 flights, I didn't notice the smell, but on one of the flights, I noticed it. But I didn't say anything to my crew. And the cameraman tapped me on the shoulder and he went, is that the smell? And I went, yeah, welcome to the party. And he looked around and he said to me, but nobody's saying anything. I said, there you have it.
Mm,
So I leaned forward and there was a businessman in the row in front in a suit reading the Financial Times. And I said, excuse me, sir, can you smell something in the air? And he went, oh, yes. I said, what do you think it is? He said, I'm sure it's fine. And right there, that's the problem. When people board an
yeah.
airplane, they totally trust the system. They trust that their bags will be screened for security. They trust that the pilots are well rested, that the plane's been properly maintained. Everybody trusts the system. Nobody wants to question it. And now they need to start questioning the thing because, most people can fly on an airplane and they'll probably be okay. But if you have health issues, if you're a frequent flyer, if you're pregnant, perhaps, or you have respiratory problems, etc., you know, then it could be a different ball game. And also, it could be a combined exposure. You could be somebody who lives in the countryside and they've sprayed the field beside you with pesticides the day before. So you've already had a heavy chemical exposure. Now you get on the airplane, you have another chemical exposure. You could be on some medications and then you could fly, and these exposures could have a compounded effect. I went to work and I smelt it every time I went to work. So I was getting a lot more exposure. There's people, it's especially in shorter flights, you get more exposures because you're going up and down. And most of these exposures are occurring in the climb and descent. Generally, in the cruise, generally speaking, that's when the air quality is at its best. And that's because the engines are operating at steady state and there's the absolute bare minimum leakage, inconsequential virtually. So if you do a long flight, for most of the flight, everything's going to be okay. But on shorter flights, they leak usually when there's a power change in the engines.
I hope you don't mind if we move on to the second film at the
Sure.
Raindance Film Festival, though they are very intrinsically linked. So, our journey with lobular cancer. In many ways, like I mentioned, it's due to the exposure to toxic chemicals and that these long-term health effects come into play. And one of the central figures in both films is Dr. Susan Michaelis, who appears in This Is Your Captain Speaking, but takes center stage in our journey with lobular cancer. Can you talk about when you kind of first met Susan and what led you to focus this latest documentary on her and her story?
Sure. So our journey with it's lobular breast cancer, just so that it's very specific to breast cancer. So when I was campaigning these issues back in 2001, I was told about a pilot in Australia who was also campaigning these issues, and that's how I got introduced to Susan, and we both started campaigning these matters. And when she was ill health retired from flying due to these oil fumes, she was 34 years of age, and she did a number of tests, and they said, you've got a real higher chance now of getting cancer later in your life, so keep an eye out. So she when she was in 2021, when she was just 40 years of age, she had a tiny little red mark on her left breast, less than a millimeter, like a freckle nearly, and thought, oh, I wonder what that is. Had a mammogram, which is an X-ray of the breast, was told fine. Had an ultrasound of the breast, told she was fine, sent away. 6 months later, it got a little bit redder, so she went back. They gave her another mammogram, another ultrasound, said you're all fine. And she remembered the fact she was told, you're high risk of cancer here from your chemical exposures. So the consultant, who was also a real wise old owl, he had his suspicions, and he said, what we're going to do is biopsy this. And it came back that she had invasive lobular breast cancer, the second most common type of breast cancer. And this breast cancer rarely forms a lump, doesn't usually show on a mammogram, doesn't often show on ultrasound. And yet the main kind of defense mechanism that the health service has for screening ladies for breast cancer is a mammogram. And for the more common type of breast cancer, it's kind of deemed the gold standard. But for lobular breast cancer, it really doesn't do its job. And you really need to have an MRI scan. So having done the journey with her and seen what happened, and then in 2021, the disease spread to her spine and her back, and she's now got secondary breast cancer. I thought, hang on a minute, here's somebody who's now paying the ultimate price for simply doing their job. So I thought this isn't right, and there's going to be millions of other women in the world who are going to be diagnosed with disease, and a lot of them will be diagnosed late because they go for the mammogram, they're told they're all clear, and the cancer's growing away while nobody's detected it. So I thought I need to play my role and try and change this for the future. And then we also discovered that there isn't a specific treatment for this type of breast cancer. You're just treated on a one size fits all. And I thought, that's not right either. So we created the Lobular Moonshot Project, which is a campaign to get the British government to fund a £20 million 5-year research project to fully understand this disease, lobular breast cancer, so that a specific treatment can be designed to give people in the future far better outcomes. And it's the most supported political campaign in the nation. As of today, 17th of June, it's got 362 MPs telling the government, we want this project funded. It's the majority of MPs. The government hasn't done that yet. However, today, the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, did finally agree in the House of Commons when questioned by the Shadow Health Secretary today that he will meet with us to discuss that. So the film that's going to screen at Raindance basically tells the journey of the remarkable ladies, including Susan, who've run this campaign. They've all been diagnosed with lobular breast cancer, and they all want to change the future for the 1,000 people a day who are being diagnosed with this disease. And it's just good on them.
Absolutely, absolutely. I found this film really, really powerful, and I really do urge everybody to go watch this one. I actually sat down when watching both of these films. I put this one on first because I thought this is going to be a bit of a tough watch, and it is. But I think it's an absolutely essential film. And over the weekend, I traveled back to see my parents over the weekend for Father's Day, and I ended up speaking to my mum about it, and she wasn't aware of kind of lobular breast cancer, and they're very subtle symptoms to find out. And I thought, like, wow, this is what the film is about, is kind of like spreading that message, spreading that awareness. And I just think it's astonishing how little research focus there is, and how little funding there is. And I wondered, do you think there's a reason for that at all?
I think, well, we've spoken to scientists, and there's a limited amount of money in the world to do everything that people want to do, because so much money is wasted on things like that. Anyway, but so with the money available, they've focused on the primary type of breast cancer because it's 85% of breast cancer. And you think, well, I can
Mm,
understand that. They think, well, if we're going to invest X number of millions of dollars, we're going to get a better return for the money. But, and breast cancer survival rates have improved generally. But this is the forgotten breast cancer, and people need
mm,
to know. And I think it's also important in making the film. I've met hundreds of women who've had breast cancer, and so many women just say, "Oh, I had breast cancer." They don't actually know what type of breast cancer they have. They might know what the hormone
yeah.
status of the breast cancer was, but they don't know, was it lobular, was it ductal? They don't know. And I think people should know. And I also think there's a message for the younger audiences today. It's what you drink, what you eat, how you live your life today, the makeup products, the chemicals you're exposed to, they are going to determine significantly whether you end up with a type of cancer in the future. So, the next time you're drinking to excess, or you're not sleeping properly, or you're having some sort of cheap makeup because it was cheap, what's in that makeup? What are those ingredients? What can they do to you? And there's a charity in the UK called Breast Cancer UK that is entirely focused on raising awareness of the effect of chemicals and lifestyle on developing cancer in the future. And I think that's something young people today should really be aware of, because trust me, you do not want to get breast cancer.
Mm, mm. I thought the documentary was really interesting as well, in terms of how it focused on the political process of having to kind of lobby for this focus and research and funding. I was feeling quite conflicted by it, because on one hand I felt that it was great that there was this democratic process in which you can campaign for change, but on the other hand it's really frustrating to just see how kind of slow and bureaucratic that process is. And even things such as like general elections can really set you back years. And like, I thought, you've lived through it in real time. What are your thoughts on kind of navigating that process, and what's your feeling on that kind of lobbying that you had to do?
It's really tough, and here's the overlap between the two films. Susan and I took all the experience we had from campaigning aviation into Lobular. So, that was like, in a great irony, that was our kind of apprenticeship for doing Lobular. And and in many ways, campaigning Lobular is much easier, because in the other film, you're campaigning against massive industries who are going to push back, like big tobacco, or whatever, or the food industry, etc. Whereas in Lobular, how do you push back against trying to
Mm.
save people? So, but the success of the campaign is entirely due to the fact that we found some MPs that were really willing to stand up and be counted. So it started in the last government with Sir Jeremy Quinn and Deanna Davidson. They said, "Oh, look, we're going to run with this," and it's only because of them that we got other MPs on board, and we got all the meetings, and then we finally got to meet the former Health Secretary, Victoria Atkins. and she was convinced to fund it. And then the second time round, we learned that we should have a more bipartisan, because we thought we'll have everybody. And it's incredible. Every political party in the nation supports this campaign. Every MP from every political party, apart from some Tories and some Labour MPs, support it. So it's important to have that support to open the doors, because you if you have a problem and you write to your MP, they get hundreds of letters all day long, and they write to you back, say, oh yeah, great, yeah, I'll look into it. They might send a letter off, and it's not that they don't care, they just have so many other things to do, they can't do it. What you need is somebody who will grab hold of it and say, okay, I'm going to put my neck out and I'm going to really move this forward. You need allies in the corridors of power. And we've had
Mm.
some good allies. I'm sure we could get some more. We're making progress. Um, my question to your audience is, you elect MPs. A majority of MPs have said this project should be funded. For me, if they don't fund it, it's democracy denied. Because if you don't do what the majority of MPs are telling you to do, then we might as well tear up the whole system and start again. Because what's the point otherwise? So I'm hopeful that when we finally get to meet the health secretary, that this government will fund the research and will show that Britain leads the way in research into this type of breast cancer. Because the people leaving school today, in 20 years time, when they get diagnosed, they may walk into a doctor and they say, oh, there's a specific treatment for this disease, and they may come to the Raindance Film Festival and think, oh, I remember watching that film when I was young. Those are the people who changed it.
With both of these films, they're premiering at the Raindance Festival. What does success look like for you post these festivals? What's next for these films and for you?
So for the This Is Your Captain Speaking, we really want to get a good sales agent on board to try and take this film globally, because it's a global issue. And you know good sales agents are like car salesmen. There's a lot of real rogue people out there in the film industry who aren't good sales agents, and there are a few gems, and we just hope we find one of those to really. They've got the contacts to get the film screened at festivals, TV networks, etc. So that's what's important for that film. Um, for the Lobular film, it will have a very short festival run in the UK, and then we're going to put it out for everybody to see, because it's there to inform people so that they can try and put more pressure on the government to get this funded ASAP. Um, so they
Mm.
have kind of different outcomes. But also, I would like to say a big, massive thank you to Raindance for screening these two films. They have thousands and thousands of films to choose from, and Elliot Grove and his team there have been more than kind to us to select these two films and help spread the word. So, big thank you to Raindance. It's amazing what they've done in becoming probably the number one independent film festival in Europe.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's great. That's great. My final question is one that we ask all the filmmakers on the Film Angle here. So we have a series where we work through the Sight and Sound greatest films of all time list, and there's a lot of films on there that have kind of influenced filmmakers, modern day filmmakers, and modern day films. So before you leave, it'd be great to know, what are some of the films that kind of maybe aren't your favorite films, but shaped the type of films you want to make, and the films you have made so far?
No, it's a good question. I like the film, the Academy Award winning film In the Heat of the Night, 1960s film, because of what it represented. It was the film industry cast a black actor in the lead role for the first time, and it was like a lot of people said, "No, you can't do that. That's completely crazy." And it's such an amazingly powerful film, and it's tribute to the industry. It was like a changing moment, a defining point in time in the entertainment
Mm-hmm.
industry, that everybody was going to be equal. And so I love that film, and it's well made and great cast. Sidney Poitier. And interesting, there's virtually no music in the entire film. It's just all done with great atmos. So I love that film. Um, I love the film Heat, with Al
Mm,
Pacino, Robert De Niro. The scene in the coffee shop is absolutely incredible. When I went to Raindance, one of the teachers there, they said they showed you that it's one of the few films that's ever been made where they made it as a TV film, and it did well in TV. And they thought, hang on, we should make this as a studio film. So they used the same director, the same cinematographer, and they remade the same film again, but this time using the best actors in the world. And with no disrespect to the TV actors who were in the original version, if you watch the scene between in the coffee shop in the TV version, and then you put Robert De Niro and Al Pacino there, boy, are they some of the greatest actors there ever lived. And that's just actors are, if you're a filmmaker and you're thinking of making a film, trust me, learn from my mistake. Get the very best actors you can, because it's priceless in the performance. So that's a film that I really, really love. I love, because I'm from aviation background, I love the film The Right Stuff, which is all about the early
mm,
space program. Um, I like Interstellar, the music score, and I particularly love um, some of the. I love the music of Ennio Morricone. He did all these spaghetti westerns back in the '60s, and he did
yes.
one film called Once Upon a Time in the West. And there's this scene where this young little boy runs out only to find his family are all dead. And the music score that went with that is a classic demonstration of how music transforms a film, totally transforms a film. And a big shout out for in our film, Our Journey with Lobular Breast Cancer, screening at Raindance. The music score was done by the husband of one of the ladies who has lobular breast cancer, and his name's Ian Livingston. And he said, "Look, I hear about your film. I'll do the music score. I do it for nothing for you because it's such an important issue." And boy, did he deliver amazing music score. So music's really important. Finally, of all the
Yeah.
films that you talk about, if the ultimate best film I'd say I've ever seen is The Shawshank Redemption, without a doubt. Love it.
Classic, absolute classic. And Morricone is just an incredible composer, incredible music there. So thank you for sharing those films with us, Tristan, and thank you for sharing your documentary films as well. I think they're both really important, and I hope you have a lot of success with the Raindance premieres and a big reaction from that. So thank you for joining us today.
And thank you so much for having me on the show and allowing these films to have a voice. Thank you.
Thank you again to Tristan there for his insights on both of those films. We only had a short amount of time to speak to Tristan there, and I tried to kind of give each film equal kind of amounts of time. Hopefully that came across. I was really kind of fascinated by the This Is Your Captain Speaking documentary. It's a subject matter that I wasn't aware of. And as somebody who flies occasionally, it's really interesting to kind of hear about these issues that stem from the air that you breathe, essentially. And it is a bit of a controversial subject, but Tristan has been campaigning for kind of more research and a change within the aviation industry on this matter, of which he's been doing for quite a while now. And then Our Journey with Lobular Breast Cancer is a really kind of powerful documentary film, and I think any documentary film that talks about cancer is. But again, and you probably heard it in the interview there, just how I guess gobsmacked I am at the kind of lack of research into this very specific type of cancer, and the fact that although we've known about this cancer for some time, there's still no specific treatment. We don't really know that much about it, and all it takes is for some funding and some research into it, and we'll almost most definitely be able to find some kind of treatment that hopefully works. And yeah, it's as much as it is a powerful documentary, it's also one that looks into the kind of inner workings of political lobbying and having to work through that process. And I find that equally as fascinating and frustrating experience at the same time. So yeah, they are films that are kind of campaigning about very important issues at the same time. So I very much recommend getting out there and watching them when they become available. And make sure to follow us on Instagram and TikTok, and we'll make sure to do our best to kind of point you in the right direction when they are available publicly. But for now, that has been the episode for this week. If you've enjoyed it, please make sure to leave us a 5-star rating or review. We do really appreciate it. And if you'd like to keep up to date with us, you can find us at The Film Angle on Instagram and TikTok. We also have a Film Angle playlist, so if you want to listen to what we listen to, you can find that in the show notes. Be sure to catch us next week for more cinematic discussions. Goodbye.